You are useless. You will never be anything. Those were the words my father, Thomas Pierce, spat at me across the dinner table the night I turned 16. His face was twisted with rage, the veins on his forehead bulging as he slammed my failed math exam in front of me. My mother, Margaret, sat in silence, eyes cold and lips pressed together, while my younger brother, Lucas, snickered into his sleeve. Then my father's voice became final, like a judge passing sentence. "Pack your things. Get out. You are no daughter of mine." Rain was pouring when the front door slammed shut behind me. Two duffel bags, $200 crumpled in my pocket, and the sound of my mother's heels clicking away as she closed the door. My brother's laughter followed me into the night like a curse. I remember standing on the driveway, soaked trembling, and staring at the mansion I had once called home. The windows glowed warmly behind me, but not a single person opened the door again. That was the night my family buried me alive while I was still breathing. 8 years later, I stood inside a chapel, the scent of lilies mixing with candle wax, watching those same people pretend to mourn the only man who had ever saved me, my grandfather, Henry Whitmore. Thomas Pierce sat in the front row, his black suit tailored to perfection, his cufflinks gleaming, but his eyes were not on the casket. They were on the lawyer Samuel Grant. "When do we read the will?" he muttered loud enough for me to hear. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, her performance flawless for the crowd of neighbors who whispered about her elegance. Lucas leaned back, casually, his wrist tilted so the gold face of his watch caught the light as if he were on a runway, not at a funeral. I stood alone near the back, my black dress clinging to my damp skin, my pulse hammering in my ears. Nobody looked at me as if I were still 16, still the disgrace they had thrown out into the storm. But Henry had taken me in that night, wrapping me in a blanket and whispering words that stitched my broken soul back together. "You are not useless, Natalie. You are my granddaughter." Now his coffin lay closed, his hands folded forever, and the only sound louder than my heartbeat was the creak of Samuel Grant's leather briefcase as he pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. The air tightened. My father straightened in his chair, my mother clutched her pearls, my brother leaned forward. They thought they were about to divide up Henry's fortune like vultures circling meat. They had no idea that this envelope carried a truth that would set me free and burn their world to ashes. My name is Natalie Pierce, and I am 24 years old. Today, I stand in black watching my parents pretend to grieve, but most of my life has been spent standing in their shadow unseen and unwanted. The Pierce family name carried weight in our town. My father Thomas ran a successful construction firm, shaking hands with politicians and posing for newspaper photographs. My mother Margaret was obsessed with image hosting charity luncheons where she wore pearls and told stories about her perfect family. And then there was my brother Lucas, 2 years younger than me, but treated like royalty from the day he was born. Every soccer game he played was a celebration, every mediocre grade of his excused as brilliance misunderstood. Meanwhile, my own achievements, honor roll certificates, volunteer hours at the community clinic sketches I poured my soul into were dismissed as trivial, childish, or embarrassing. I grew up in a house where laughter was currency and love was rationed. At dinner, Thomas and Margaret would lean forward with glowing eyes to ask Lucas about his day, about his friends, about his plans. When I tried to share something, Thomas would wave his hand as if shooing away a fly. "Nobody cares about your little hobbies, Natalie. Focus on something useful for once." Margaret would change the subject to Lucas's future while Lucas smirked at me across the table, fully aware of his throne as the golden child. Birthdays told the same story. On his 10th, Lucas got a gleaming red dirt bike parked in the driveway with a bow. On my 13th, I got a math workbook and a lecture about responsibility. At Christmas, his pile of gifts reached the tree branches. Mine fit into a single paper bag tucked near the kitchen doorway. They said it built character. What it built was silence. The cruelty was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, suffocating. When family friends visited, Margaret would pull Lucas close, introducing him proudly while I was told to bring out more drinks or clear plates. More than once I heard Thomas joke, "She is not the smart one, but at least she can help out." They laughed. I smiled through burning cheeks, but inside, something cracked a little more each time. My only refuge was my grandfather, Henry Whitmore. He lived on the outskirts of town in a modest farmhouse that smelled of pine and tobacco. Whenever I could escape, I would ride my bike there, dirt on my jeans and tears on my face, and he would meet me at the porch with a hug that felt like a fortress. He never asked why I came. He simply poured me lemonade, showed me how to tend his garden, and let me breathe. With him, I was not the useless daughter or the invisible child. I was just Natalie, and that was enough. Even as a little girl, I understood something my parents never did. Henry saw people, not masks. He saw through the smiles my mother rehearsed, through the arrogance my father polished, through the entitlement Lucas carried like a crown. He looked into me, and instead of disappointment, I found belonging. Still, I tried so hard to earn my parents' approval. I studied until my eyes blurred, stayed quiet when they belittled me, and carried the weight of chores without complaint. I told myself if I worked harder, if I made myself smaller, if I disappeared into perfection, maybe one day Thomas would look at me with pride instead of disdain. But pride never came. Only those words shouted like a curse when I was 16 carved into my soul. You are useless. You will never be anything. And as I stood in the chapel, now surrounded by people who once believed I was nothing, I felt the past and present collide inside my chest. They had tried to erase me, but Henry had written me back into existence. The Pierce house was a palace built on image, and I was the stain they tried to scrub away. From the outside, it gleamed marble counters, imported rugs, chandeliers dripping with light, but inside, love was a currency spent only on Lucas. My brother's laughter echoed through every hallway like music, while my own voice was treated as static no one wanted to hear. At dinner, the hierarchy was clear. Thomas sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a man who spoke in declarations rather than conversations. Margaret floated beside him, her pearls catching the chandelier light as she smiled like a queen hosting loyal subjects. And then there was Lucas seated directly across from me, basking in their attention as if it were sunlight. They asked about his classes, his teammates, his goals. When he got a B in science, Thomas declared the teacher incompetent. When I brought home an A in English, Margaret waved her hand and said, "That's nice, dear. Now clear the dishes." I still remember one dinner in particular. Lucas had just been offered a spot on the varsity soccer team at 15. The announcement was treated like a royal decree. Thomas raised his glass. To Lucas, the future of this family. Margaret beamed. Lucas smirked. I whispered that I had been accepted into the honor society at school, expecting at least a nod. Instead, Thomas barked, "Stop embarrassing yourself, Natalie! Nobody cares about your little clubs." Laughter bubbled around the table, not cruel in volume, but cruel in dismissal. My cheeks burned as I gathered plates, the sound of their toast ringing like a verdict. The favoritism was not subtle, it was ritual. Birthdays became ceremonies of excess for Lucas. His 16th brought a brand new car parked in the driveway with a ribbon taller than me. I watched from the window as neighbors applauded and cameras flashed. When my 17th came, I received a calculator and a muttered work harder from Thomas. Margaret claimed it was practical. I called it punishment disguised as a gift. Public appearances were worse. At charity galas, Margaret clutched Lucas's arm, introducing him to donors as her brilliant son. I was instructed to stand behind, to smile, to fetch more champagne. Once, a woman asked Margaret, "And is this your daughter?" She hesitated, eyes scanning me as if calculating risk. "Oh, she's shy," she finally said, dismissing me with a flick of her hand. My father leaned in and whispered, "Smile, Natalie. Don't ruin this evening." I smiled until my jaw ached. At school, the shadow of favoritism followed me. Teachers who knew my family compared me to Lucas openly. "Your brother is such a leader," one said, glancing at my quiet presence. Lucas made sure everyone knew it too. "Natalie's just background noise," he joked once in the cafeteria. Laughter erupted. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reminded myself that at least Grandpa Henry knew better. Behind closed doors, cruelty sharpened. If Lucas came home late, Thomas scolded him lightly, then handed him cash for gas. If I arrived 5 minutes past curfew after a library session, Thomas stood at the doorway, face dark with fury. Irresponsible, ungrateful, useless. The word became a drumbeat in my life. Margaret rarely defended me. Instead, she whispered, "Don't make things worse. Keep your head down." Keeping my head down became my survival. But even survival had cracks. On nights when Lucas partied with friends, I scrubbed wine stains out of rugs before my parents noticed. When he crashed his car into a mailbox, Thomas covered the repairs and praised his resilience. When I asked for $20 to buy a used textbook, Margaret sighed as if I had asked for a diamond necklace. The cruelty was systematic, rehearsed, perfected, and it was all wrapped in the illusion of the perfect family. Neighbors admired Thomas's booming laugh, Margaret's elegance, Lucas's charm. They never saw me carrying trays, cleaning up messes, biting my tongue until it bled. They believed the Pierce family was untouchable. I was the only one who knew the rot behind the marble. I told myself for years that if I worked harder, if I stayed quiet, if I sacrificed enough, maybe one day they would see me. Maybe one day I would belong at that table as more than a servant in disguise. But the truth settled slowly, painfully. In their eyes, Lucas would always be the golden child. I would always be the shadow. And shadows, I was about to learn, could be erased with a single word: useless. I was 16 when the fault line finally split beneath my feet. It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of evening that smelled of overcooked steak and burned coffee. Lucas had just come home waving a certificate from his coach. Most improved player, it said in bold letters. My parents erupted into applause as if he had been handed the Nobel Prize. My father Thomas poured himself a glass of bourbon, raised it high, and declared, "To Lucas, proof that hard work pays off." My mother Margaret beamed with pride, snapping photos for her social media page. I had walked into the dining room clutching my own papers, an essay graded with an A and a note from my teacher praising my dedication. It wasn't a trophy, but it was mine. My heart beat fast as I held it out. "I wanted to show you this," I whispered, hoping, praying for once they would look at me the way they looked at him. Thomas didn't even glance. He tossed his napkin on the table, his voice rising like thunder. "Another useless essay about books. Do you think this will build anything? Do you think this will put food on the table? You are wasting time and embarrassing this family." The room fell silent. Margaret looked down at her pearls, refusing to meet my eyes. Lucas leaned back, smirking, twirling his fork between his fingers like a dagger. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Thomas slammed his fist on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "That's it," he roared. "I am done pretending you have potential. You are useless, Natalie. You will never be anything. Pack your bags. Tonight." The words struck like a physical blow. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. "Dad, please, do not call me," that he cut me off his finger, stabbing the air like a weapon. "You are no daughter of mine," Margaret whispered Thomas. But it was weak, half-hearted, more for appearance than mercy. She didn't stop him. She never did. I stumbled to my room, tears blinding me, hands shaking as I shoved clothes into 2 worn duffel bags. I took the photo of Grandpa Henry from my nightstand, the only piece of comfort I owned, and tucked it carefully between shirts. My mother appeared in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the hall light. For a second, I thought she might reach for me, might tell me this was all a mistake. Instead, she pressed 2 crumpled bills into my palm. $200, she whispered. "Don't make things worse." Then she turned away. When I dragged my bags down the grand staircase, Lucas was waiting at the bottom. He didn't speak, didn't try to stop me. He only smirked, his eyes gleaming with triumph, and whispered, "Good riddance." The front door opened. Rain lashed against my face, cold and merciless. Thunder cracked above, drowning out the sound of my sobs. Thomas's voice bellowed from behind me one last time. "Get out and don't come back." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I stood on the driveway, soaked through, clutching my bags, staring at the mansion that had never been a home. Through the glowing windows, I saw silhouettes moving, my father pouring another drink, my mother fussing with the curtains, Lucas laughing at something on his phone. Life went on inside as if I had never existed. The rain blurred the world around me, but inside my chest something crystallized. I was alone, unwanted, cast out like garbage. Yet even in the storm, a whisper rose in my memory, my grandfather's voice from years earlier. "You are not useless, Natalie. You are my granddaughter." That whisper was the only warmth I carried into the night. It was the thread that kept me from unraveling completely. And though I did not know it then, though I could barely put one foot in front of the other that night was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. The storm had swallowed me whole by the time I reached the edge of town. My sneakers were soaked through my duffel bags, heavy with water, every step dragging me closer to collapse. The streetlights flickered above me like dying stars. I had nowhere to go, no friends close enough to take me, and no relatives who cared. There was only one place left, one person who might open the door. My grandfather, Henry Whitmore. Henry lived in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts, a place that smelled of pine and wood smoke, far removed from the polished marble of the Pierce estate. As I trudged up the gravel path, rain plastering my hair to my face, I half feared he would turn me away too. After all, I was the family disappointment the child branded useless. Maybe the shame stretched even to him. But before I could even knock, the porch light flicked on. The door swung open, and there he was, tall and steady despite his 79 years, his flannel shirt worn but warm, his eyes sharp with recognition. "Natalie," he said, and in that single word was more love than I had heard from my parents in 16 years. I broke. I dropped the bags and collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest, the storm still raging around us. Henry pulled me inside without hesitation, shutting the door firmly against the night. He wrapped me in a thick wool blanket and guided me to the old leather armchair by the fire. "Tell me what happened," he said softly, though his eyes already burned with suspicion. I shook my head, tears still streaming. "Dad, he said I'm useless. He told me to leave." Henry's jaw tightened. For a moment, silence filled the room except for the crackle of the fire. Then he knelt beside me, his weathered hands gripping mine. "Listen to me, Natalie. You are not useless. You never were. You are my granddaughter, and you are worth more than all their shallow pride." The words landed like balm on a wound that had been festering for years. My chest loosened air, finally flowing into lungs that had felt strangled since the moment my father cast me out. Henry laid out rules that night, not cruel but firm, the kind that built foundations instead of cages. "You'll stay here as long as you need," he said, "but you'll finish school. You'll help me around the farm, and you'll learn the value of work, not the illusion of status." I nodded, clinging to his words as if they were lifelines. For the first time in years, I felt seen. The days that followed were hard, but they were real. I woke at dawn to feed the chickens, helped Henry mend fences studied by lamplight until my eyes blurred. Each night, Henry sat across from me at the small kitchen table sipping black coffee and asking about my day. He listened, not distracted, not dismissive, but fully present. When I faltered, he encouraged. When I succeeded, he celebrated. Slowly, the bruises on my heart began to fade. Henry told me stories of his own youth, of battles fought overseas, of mistakes made and lessons earned. "Life will try to convince you that worth is measured in money or titles," he said, once his gaze steady. "But real worth is measured in how you show up for the people who need you. And Natalie, you showed up here tonight. That matters." I held on to those words with everything I had. Years later, I would understand that Henry had already begun preparing something far greater than a roof and a meal for me. But at 16, all I knew was that he had given me back my dignity when the people who should have protected me tore it away. He became my anchor, my shield, my proof that love could exist outside bloodlines poisoned by greed. That night in Henry's farmhouse, wrapped in a blanket, sipping warm tea, I realized I had not been cast out into nothing. I had been delivered into the only home that truly wanted me. Life in Henry Whitmore's farmhouse was nothing like the marble estate I had left behind, and yet it became the only place I ever truly belonged. The mornings began with roosters crowing, not alarms set by a mother obsessed with punctual appearances. I rose with the sun pulled on work boots and joined Henry in tending the garden or repairing fences. My hands blistered, my muscles ached, but for the first time in my life, my labor felt meaningful. I was not scrubbing dishes to prove my worth or cleaning up after a golden boy. I was building something alongside a man who believed in me. I went back to school in the fall, determined to prove my father wrong. Every night I studied by lamplight at the worn wooden table while Henry sipped black coffee across from me. When I stumbled over equations, he would lean forward, his voice steady. "Don't quit now, Natalie. You are capable of more than they ever let you believe." His faith lit a fire inside me that grades alone never could. By the time graduation came, I was in the top 10 of my class. Thomas and Margaret didn't show up. Lucas didn't send a word. But Henry was there clapping louder than anyone, his proud smile brighter than any diploma. With his encouragement, I pursued nursing. The work was grueling, long hours, endless exams, but it gave me purpose. At the hospital, I discovered the quiet heroism of being there for people at their weakest. It was not glamorous, not the kind of achievement my parents would ever brag about, but it was real. And every time I helped a patient sit up, held someone's hand in pain, or soothed a frightened child, I heard Henry's words echo real worth is measured in how you show up. Meanwhile, Henry grew older. His strong hands still built fences, but his breath grew shorter, his steps slower. One evening, after a sudden fainting spell, the doctors diagnosed him with a heart condition. I moved faster than balancing hospital shifts with taking care of him at home. I learned to cook his meals low in salt, drove him to every appointment, and sat beside his bed when the nights grew long. He would try to wave me off with a smile. Don't fuss over me, Natalie. I've lived a good life. But I refused to leave his side. It was during those quiet nights that Henry began to speak of the past. He confessed how deeply Thomas's arrogance had wounded him, how Margaret's obsession with appearances had disappointed him, how Lucas's entitlement reminded him of men who had squandered everything. I don't want my life's work ending up in their hands, he said one night, his voice gravelly with fatigue. I want it to go to someone who understands responsibility, someone who knows the value of care. His eyes locked with mine. That someone is you. I laughed, then nervously thinking it was only sentiment. Grandpa, I don't need money, I just need you. But Henry shook his head. One day, Natalie, you'll understand. This isn't just money, it's protection. It's justice. I didn't realize until much later that he meant every word. I didn't know about the meetings he had with Samuel Grant, the lawyer who visited quietly carrying thick folders and asking Henry to sign papers with steady hands. I didn't know about the letters Henry wrote in his journal each night, recording his decisions in his own words. I didn't know about the medical evaluations he underwent, ensuring that no one could ever claim he had been manipulated. All I knew was that my grandfather was growing weaker, and I clung to him with everything I had. On the nights when his heart raced and I feared it might stop, I would sit by his bed holding his hand, whispering, I'm here. I'll always be here. And he would squeeze my fingers back, his eyes filled with something fierce and unyielding. Remember this, Natalie, he said once, voice barely above a whisper. They threw you away because they could not see your worth, but I see it, and one day the world will too. At the time, I thought his words were simply comfort for a granddaughter carrying more than she should. I had no idea they were prophecy. The day of Henry Whitmore's funeral was cold, the kind of gray sky that pressed down on your chest and made breathing heavy. I arrived early, helping the ushers set up chairs and arranging the flowers I had chosen myself. White lilies his favorite. The church smelled of polished wood and candle wax, solemn and steady. I wanted the service to feel honest because Henry had lived honestly. Then the Pierces arrived. My parents swept into the chapel as if they were stepping onto a stage. My father, Thomas, wore a suit so perfectly pressed it seemed more fitting for a boardroom than a place of mourning. His chin was high, his eyes sharp, not a trace of grief softening them. He shook hands with neighbors as though this were another networking event, his voice booming. Yes, my father lived a long life. We did everything we could for him. Lies dripped easily from his tongue. My mother Margaret followed, draped in black silk, her pearls gleaming against her throat. She clutched a lace handkerchief, dabbing at eyes that were suspiciously dry until a new person glanced her way. Then the tears came instantly, perfectly timed droplets of sorrow. She leaned into whispers of sympathy, soaking them up like applause. People murmured about her strength, her dignity. I wanted to scream that she had never visited Henry once during his illness, that every tear she displayed was theater. Lucas trailed behind, 22 and smug, dressed in designer black that looked more like a fashion statement than respect. He slid into the pew with his phone in hand, snapping a photo of the flowers to post online with the caption, Rest in peace, Grandpa. A performance for followers, not for Henry. Then he leaned back, stretching his legs arrogantly, flashing the gold watch Thomas had gifted him. I watched his reflection in the polished wood, saw the satisfied smirk when people glanced his way. The whispers started around me, neighbors commenting on how devoted the Pierces were, how tragic it must be to lose Henry. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Devoted. They had abandoned him. Tragic. They had only come because there was money to claim. My stomach twisted as I remembered all the nights Henry had sat alone in that farmhouse, too weak to cook, too proud to complain, while I spoon-fed him soup and checked his heartbeat. Thomas never came. Margaret never called. Lucas never sent a message. But now they draped themselves in black and played the grieving family for the crowd. When the pastor began the service, I tried to focus on the words on the hymns Henry loved. I tried to pray for peace, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the weight of their hypocrisy pressing against my chest. Thomas clapped a heavy hand on Lucas's shoulder during the eulogy, nodding at every mention of family legacy. Margaret's sniffles grew louder whenever someone turned to look at her. Lucas yawned halfway through the sermon, scrolling on his phone beneath the pew. As the coffin was carried out, sunlight broke briefly through the clouds, catching on the brass handles. My knees nearly buckled. I wanted to follow Henry into the earth to keep him safe, even in death. Instead, I stood frozen, the image of my family's false grief seared into my mind. They had taken so much from him already. I feared they would now try to take everything else. After the service, I lingered in the back, watching as Thomas cornered Samuel Grant, the lawyer. His voice was low but urgent. "When do we read the will?" It was not grief. It was hunger. Margaret hovered at his side, her painted lips forming a trembling smile for anyone who passed. Lucas shoved his phone into his pocket, eyes glittering with anticipation. In that moment, it hit me with brutal clarity. They were not here for Henry. They were not here for me. They were here for the estate, the company, the fortune Henry had built with his own calloused hands. They believed it all belonged to them, as though inheritance were another performance of entitlement. I stood in the shadows, my fists clenched so tight my nails cut crescents into my palms. Let them smirk, let them preen. They thought they knew how the story would end. But Henry had trusted me with his final truth, and Samuel Grant now carried it in that leather briefcase. The stage was set, and soon their performance would collapse under the weight of reality. The funeral crowd thinned until only a handful of us remained in the chapel. The air was heavy thick with incense and unspoken greed. My father, Thomas, paced near the front pew, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. My mother, Margaret, perched beside him, posture-perfect handkerchief poised like a stage prop. Lucas slouched on the bench, his phone still buzzing with notifications, though for once he seemed distracted. His eyes darted toward the briefcase resting at Samuel Grant's side. Samuel was an older man, 61, his silver hair combed neatly, his glasses perched low on his nose. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, commanding silence without needing to raise his voice. He placed the briefcase on the altar, unclasped it with 2 sharp clicks, and withdrew a thick envelope sealed with red wax. The sound echoed through the empty church, final and irreversible. This. Samuel began, his tone steady, is the last will and testament of Henry Whitmore. It was drafted, signed, and notarized with full medical evaluations confirming his capacity. There will be no dispute of his clarity. His gaze swept across us, lingering briefly on Thomas, whose jaw tightened. We will proceed in order. Thomas straightened, adjusting his tie as though preparing for an award. Margaret lifted her chin, eyes glistening in expectation. Lucas leaned forward, the glow of imagined millions already dancing in his pupils. Samuel opened the document, the crisp paper trembling only slightly in his hands. To my grandson, Lucas Pierce, he read, I leave the gold pocket watch I carried as a young man. It has long since stopped ticking, but perhaps it will remind him that time, unlike charm, cannot be wasted. The silence that followed was brutal. Lucas blinked, his mouth hanging open. Watch, he stammered. That's it. He looked toward his father for support, but Thomas's face had hardened. The pocket watch, tarnished and cracked, was produced from a small velvet pouch and placed on the table. Lucas didn't reach for it. His fists clenched instead, the sound of grinding teeth filling the air. Samuel continued unshaken. To my daughter-in-law, Margaret Pierce, I leave the family photo albums. May she find in these pages the family she was too busy curating for others to ever truly know. Margaret gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. The album's heavy leather-bound collections Henry had kept in his farmhouse were carried in by an assistant. She opened one, her painted nails trembling, and found not the polished images she adored, but candid shots of Henry in the garden of me laughing beside him of evenings by the fire. She slammed it shut, her face paling beneath her makeup. My father leaned forward, his voice sharp, and for me, Samuel's eyes did not flinch. To my son Thomas Pierce, I leave this. He lifted a small box and opened it to reveal a simple hand mirror, its edges worn the glass slightly cracked. A note lay beside it, written in Henry's unmistakable scrawl. Samuel read aloud, "For the man who valued image over integrity. I leave a reflection of his choices. May he confront the emptiness he built." The room seemed to shatter with silence. My father's face darkened, his knuckles white as he gripped the pew. "This is a joke," he hissed. "A damn insult." Margaret reached for his arm, whispering his name, but he shook her off violently. Lucas muttered curses under his breath, the watch still lying untouched. The three of them looked like actors in a play, suddenly stripped of their lines. And then Samuel's voice shifted steady but deeper. "Finally, to my granddaughter, Natalie Pierce." The sound of my name filled the chapel like a bell, startling even me. My breath caught in my throat, my hands trembling against the wooden pew. "I leave the entirety of my estate," Samuel declared, "including my holdings in Whitmore Construction, the family properties, investments, and liquid accounts valued at $50 million to Natalie Pierce. She was the only one who showed up, the only one who cared, the only one who gave when she had nothing to gain." My vision blurred. Gasps rippled through the air, followed by the scrape of Thomas's shoes as he surged to his feet. "This is outrageous," he thundered. "She manipulated him. She doesn't deserve a dime." But Samuel was prepared. He laid down folders of documents, medical evaluations signed by doctors, dated videos of Henry speaking clearly, journals in his own handwriting describing his decision. "Mr. Whitmore anticipated your accusations," Samuel said calmly. "Every precaution was taken. This will is ironclad." My mother's handkerchief slipped from her fingers, falling forgotten onto the floor. Lucas sat frozen, the watch now looking like a shackle instead of a prize. My father glared at me with pure venom, his voice breaking with fury. "You stole this from me." For the first time, I lifted my chin and met his gaze without flinching. My voice was quiet, but it carried. "No, you gave it away when you threw me out." The air vibrated with tension, the collapse of their entitlement ringing louder than any hymn sung that day. The chapel had gone deathly quiet, save for the ragged breathing of my father. His eyes burned into me, his fists trembling as if he might lunge across the pew and rip the papers from Samuel's hands. My mother Margaret sat rigid, her knuckles pressed white against her pearls. Lucas stared at the floor, the useless pocket watch glinting in his palm, its silence mocking him louder than any ticking could. "This is fraud," Thomas spat finally, his voice echoing against the vaulted ceiling. She brainwashed him, manipulated an old man who didn't know what he was doing. Samuel Grant didn't even blink. He opened a second folder thick with documents and placed it on the altar for all to see. Mr. Whitmore anticipated such claims, he said evenly. "Here are certified medical evaluations from Dr. Evelyn Morris and Dr. Robert Lane, conducted quarterly for the past 3 years. Both doctors confirmed that Mr. Whitmore retained full mental capacity until his final days." He slid copies across the table. Initialed, signed, notarized. Undisputable. My father snatched one up, scanning it with wild eyes as if he could find a loophole with sheer rage. His face paled when he reached the signature lines. Samuel continued. "Additionally, Mr. Whitmore recorded several video statements witnessed by myself and 2 independent parties. In them he clearly articulates his wishes, his reasoning, and his knowledge of the consequences." He clicked a remote and a screen flickered to life against the chapel wall. Henry's face appeared older but steady, his eyes sharp with the same clarity I remembered. His voice carried through the speakers gravelly but unwavering. "If you are watching this, it means I am gone. To my son, Thomas, to Margaret, to Lucas, I know you will accuse Natalie of trickery. Let me be clear, this is my decision and mine alone. Natalie stood by me when you did not. She showed up when you were absent. She gave care when you offered excuses. That is why she inherits everything. If you feel robbed, it is because you abandoned me long before I left this world." Gasps rippled through the room. My mother covered her mouth, tears welling not of grief, but of humiliation. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his bravado cracking. My father's face flushed red, a vein bulging in his temple. Samuel's voice cut through the silence. In addition, Mr. Whitmore kept detailed journals of his health, his interactions, and his thoughts regarding this estate. Each entry is dated, signed, and corroborated by witnesses. They describe your absence in painful detail. He opened one of the leather-bound books, reading aloud. June 4th. Thomas hasn't called in months. Margaret says she's too busy with her charity events. Lucas visited once, asked about money for a new car, and left within an hour. Only Natalie remains. My father slammed his fist against the pew. "This is character assassination." "No," Samuel said coolly, "this is testimony." The lawyer laid out the final safeguard. Henry had filed the will with probate court months before his passing alongside video verification. The judge had already reviewed it, ensuring its legality was beyond challenge. "There is nothing you can contest," Samuel concluded. Mr. Whitmore left no cracks in this foundation. His intentions were ironclad. The weight of those words pressed into the room like stone. My father sagged back into his seat, his fury momentarily strangled by defeat. Margaret fumbled with her handkerchief, avoiding every eye. Lucas muttered, "This can't be real," but his voice carried no conviction. I sat frozen, my heart a storm of grief and vindication. I had not asked for this fortune. I had not schemed for it. But Henry had seen me, believed in me, and now his voice echoed across the grave, silencing every doubt they tried to throw at me. Thomas turned his glare on me one last time, his voice a growl. "You think this makes you worthy? You'll regret this, Natalie. Mark my words." For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. I met his gaze with a calm that wasn't mine alone. It was Henry's gift. "The only one who should regret anything I said quietly is you." The truth had been spoken, sealed, and witnessed. Their performance had collapsed. And though the war was not yet over, the battlefield was already mine. The moment Samuel Grant closed the folder, silence shattered into chaos. My father shot to his feet, his chair clattering against the marble floor with a sharp crack that made the stained glass windows tremble. His face was crimson, his voice a thunderclap that rolled through the chapel. "This is theft!" Thomas roared. "She poisoned him against us, filled his head with lies. $50 million to a girl who couldn't even pass basic math at 16, to a girl I threw out because she was useless." He jabbed a finger at me, his hand shaking with fury. "You don't deserve a cent of my father's work." My mother Margaret stumbled up after him, tears streaming down cheeks that minutes ago had been dry as stone. "Natalie, please," she pleaded, her voice quivering. "We are still family. Surely you don't intend to keep everything? Think of your mother. Think of how hard we worked." Her words curdled in my ears. Hard work I had watched Henry wither in his chair while she posed at charity galas. I had watched her avert her eyes when Thomas spat venom at me. She had never once reached out a hand when I needed it most. Lucas finally found his voice, slamming the pocket watch down on the pew so hard it cracked against the wood. "This is a joke," he barked. "I'm the heir. I'm the one who carries the Pierce name, not her. I deserve the company, the money, the houses. She's nothing but dead weight." His words echoed the ones my father had hurled at me years ago, and for a moment I was 16 again, drenched in rain, clutching my bags on the driveway. My chest tightened, but then another voice rose inside me, steady and strong, Henry's. "You are not useless, Natalie. You are my granddaughter." I stood. My knees shook, but my spine straightened as though Henry himself held me up. When I spoke, my voice was quiet, but it sliced through their fury like glass. "You threw me out when I was 16. You called me useless, worthless, nothing. You didn't care if I starved in the rain. But Grandpa did. He took me in. He saved me. And because of that, every word you say now means nothing." Thomas's face twisted, his fists clenched. "You stole my legacy!" "No," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "You gave it away when you abandoned him, when you abandoned me." You gave it away the moment you decided appearances were worth more than people. Margaret reached for me, her voice dripping with desperation. Natalie, please, we can work this out. We'll share. We'll keep the family together. I recoiled. Family. My laugh was hollow, sharp. Family doesn't throw their child onto the street. Family doesn't ignore a dying man because they're too busy hosting luncheons. You taught me what family isn't. Grandpa taught me what family is. Lucas sneered, stepping forward, his fists balled. You think you're better than me because of some piece of paper? You'll never run that company. You'll ruin it. You'll ruin everything. I took a breath steady, letting the weight of Henry's faith ground me. I don't need to run the company to prove anything. I don't need to prove anything to you. The will isn't just paper, it's truth, and it's done. The air vibrated with their rage. Thomas's hand twitched at his side, and for a terrifying second, I thought he might strike me right there in front of Henry's coffin. But Samuel's voice broke in firm and commanding. That's enough. If any of you lay a hand on her, I will ensure charges are filed immediately. Mr. Whitmore entrusted me with his estate, and I will defend it as fiercely as he intended. My father's chest heaved, his eyes wild, but something in Samuel's tone made him hesitate. He lowered his hand slowly, his breathing ragged. Margaret collapsed back into her seat, sobbing now for real, her mascara streaking. Lucas cursed under his breath and kicked the pew, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. I stood alone in the storm of their anger, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt unbreakable. Henry had given me the armor of truth, and no amount of their venom could pierce it. This is the end of your performance, I said quietly, but my words carried. Grandpa saw through it. And now, so does everyone else. The chapel fell silent again, but this time it was not oppressive. It was final. The days after the funeral were a blur of paperwork hearings and relentless whispers. News of Henry Whitmore's will spread quickly through town. Headlines painted stark contrasts: granddaughter inherits $50 million estate, and Pierce family cut out a fortune. Neighbors who once bowed to my father's authority now eyed him with suspicion, their polite smiles curdling into gossip the moment his back was turned. True to form, Thomas tried to fight. He stormed into probate court demanding the will be overturned, insisting I had manipulated Henry. Margaret arrived in black, a perfect picture of widow-like grief, though her husband was still alive, dabbing tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Lucas strutted in like he owned the courthouse, whispering to reporters about justice and what's fair. But justice was not theirs to claim. The judge listened with patience, then dismantled every argument they threw. The medical records were irrefutable, the video testimonies devastating, the notarized journals damning. Samuel Grant laid them out one by one, a fortress of proof Henry had built brick by brick. When Lucas tried to argue, the judge raised a hand. Mr. Pierce's inheritance is not about entitlement. It is about intent. Your grandfather's intent could not be clearer. The gavel struck wood sharp and final. The will stands. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Across the courtroom, Thomas's face collapsed into a storm of defeat. Margaret clutched his arm, her nails digging crescents into his sleeve, her tears now uncontrollable. Lucas slammed his fist against the bench, muttering curses that drew the bailiff's glare. But the humiliation didn't stop there. Word of the ruling spread beyond the courthouse, rippling through business circles and social clubs where my parents had once reigned. Deals evaporated, invitations dried up. The Pierce name, once polished and commanding, became a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. People who had once courted their approval now crossed the street to avoid their gaze. For me, the wait was different. I was summoned to meetings, asked to sign documents, suddenly thrust into a world of bank accounts and corporate holdings I had never imagined controlling. Samuel guided me patiently, reminding me this was Henry's legacy and I had the right to shape it. I chose caution. I didn't move into the mansion or buy new cars. I stayed in my modest apartment, continued my nursing shifts, and visited Henry's farmhouse every weekend. That place still smelled of wood smoke and coffee, his presence lingering like a steady hand on my shoulder. One evening, as I sat on the farmhouse porch watching the sunset, Samuel joined me. He rested a hand on the railing, his voice low. You know Henry never doubted this day would come. He always said, Natalie has strength they can't see, but one day they will. My throat tightened, tears stinging my eyes. For years, I had been invisible to my family, cast aside like refuse. Now, not because of money, but because of truth, they were the ones left standing in shadows. The Pierce family withdrew from public life. Margaret stopped attending galas. Thomas's business partners severed ties. Lucas vanished into obscurity, whispers of failed ventures trailing behind him. Their empire, built on appearances, had crumbled in weeks. And me, I felt no triumph, only clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, the kind Henry had prepared with meticulous care. He had given me more than money. He had given me proof that my worth was never defined by their cruelty. The gavel's echo still rang in my ears, not as a punishment, but as freedom. The first weeks after the court's decision felt surreal. $50 million sat under my name, yet my daily life hardly changed. I still woke before dawn, brewed my coffee the way Henry liked it, strong and unadorned, and drove to the hospital for my nursing shifts. Caring for patients grounded me, reminding me that worth isn't counted in bank accounts, but in the lives we touch. Still, every evening when I returned to Henry's farmhouse, I felt the weight of what he'd entrusted to me. The creak of the wooden steps, the smell of old leather and tobacco, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock, each detail whispered his presence. For a time, I feared I would drown in grief, but slowly those memories became anchors steadying me. It was during one of those evenings, sorting through his journals, that the idea came. His words filled page after page about abandonment, about the sting of being unseen by those who should love you most. I realized I wasn't the only one. There were countless kids, just like I had been at 16, cast aside, told they were worthless. Henry had saved me. Maybe I could save others. With Samuel's guidance, I established the Whitmore Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding education and vocational training for youth who had been abandoned or estranged from their families. Scholarships for nurses, mechanics, electricians, and teachers. Programs for counseling and mentorship. Safe housing for teenagers thrown into the world with nowhere to turn. Every piece of it felt like Henry's hand guiding mine across the page. The announcement made headlines: Heiress uses inheritance to help forgotten youth. Reporters expected extravagant scandal, maybe even a family feud turned reality show. Instead, they found me in scrubs, standing on a stage with trembling hands, but a steady voice declaring, "This money was born of integrity, not entitlement. It will serve those who need it most." The applause was thunderous, but what stayed with me was the quiet after, when a girl no older than 16 approached me with tears in her eyes. She whispered, "They told me I was nothing. But you proved them wrong. Maybe I can too." In that moment, I understood Henry's final gift. It wasn't just the estate, it was the chance to rewrite a story not just mine, but thousands of others. As for my parents and Lucas, they became ghosts in the edges of my life. Rumor said Thomas sold off the last of his failing ventures. Margaret retreated into silence, her once grand social circle evaporated. Lucas drifted, a man chasing shadows of wealth he believed he was owed. I felt no need to follow them, no desire for revenge. Their punishment was their own emptiness. I found my healing in smaller things: the laughter of students awarded their first scholarship, the letters from young people who said they finally felt seen, the quiet peace of sitting on the farmhouse porch with a book and the setting sun. One evening I visited Henry's grave. I laid fresh lilies on the stone, tracing his name with my fingertips. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and gold. My voice was soft but certain. "You were right, Grandpa. Worth is not what they said. Worth is what we give, and I will keep giving." I turned away, the farmhouse glowing faintly in the distance, a beacon instead of a prison. My story had begun in betrayal and rejection, but it did not end there. It ended in freedom, in purpose, in strength I never thought I had. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. I was never useless. I was chosen,